Welcome to the Pursuing Hearts podcast. My name is Cheryl, and Clarette and I invite you on the journey to pursuing God's heart together. We pray that you are drawn closer to a better understanding of the Father's heart for you as you listen in. So grab your favorite beverage, find a comfy chair, and come join in on the conversation. In today's podcast, we will be discussing how friends and family can influence our intimacy with the Father. Let's dive into the conversation. So, Clarette, how has friends and family influenced your intimacy with the Father?
The biggest part that I've realized is like examples, practical examples of what the Father's heart of God looks like. And I realized, I think it might be different if you're perhaps a parent, but because I have not been in that situation, I have the opportunity to learn from others. And I found that, especially with regards to the Father's heart of God, or even the mother's heart of God, I can learn that from parents, and especially with related to very little kids. And one example of that was a friend of mine, her little girl started school, and it was completely unfamiliar to her. And this 6-year-old was like saying, I want to go back to kindergarten. And my friend was in tears because the kid was really upset the first few days. She did not want to do this. It was not nice. She didn't know the people. It was just all strange. And yet at the same time, she had to go through school. You can't stay in kindergarten. You have to go to school. But when this friend actually expressed her heart and understanding, it's like, my daughter is going through a tough time, and it's like she wants to protect her and take it away. But at the same time, it was like, my daughter needs to go through this. I was like, in that moment, it was like, oh, I guess that is how God feels towards me when I go into a tough situation. Because in this case, and most of the time, I'm the little girl, don't want to go into the new situation and complaining about the past. But it's things like that where it was the practical example that was, in my case, life-changing. Now, this was like, I've realized I've seen these things in a couple of cases. And then it was like one day I was listening to a sermon from Timothy Keller, and he quoted C.S. Lewis, which actually put that in perspective and drew me to the part in terms of why this is so important. And just to read basically what he said. C.S. Lewis said, in each of my friends, there is something that only some other friend can fully bring out. By myself, I'm not large enough to call the whole man into activity. I want other lights than my own to show all his facets. Now that Charles is dead, I shall never again see Ronald's or Tolkien's reaction to a specifically Charles joke. Far from having more of Ronald, having him to myself, now that Charles is away, I have less of Ronald in this. Friendship exhibits a glorious nearness by resemblance to heaven itself, where the very multitude of the blessed, which no man can number, increase the fruition which each of us has of God. For every soul, seeing him in her own way, doubtless communicates that unique vision to all the rest. That, says an old author, is why the seraphim in Isaiah's vision are crying, Holy, 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 to one another. The more we thus share the heavenly bread between us, the more we shall have. And Dr. Keller sums it up and says, Lewis is saying that it took a community to know an individual. How much more would this be true of Jesus Christ? And when I
Um,
heard that, it was like, yeah, that's true. Paul talks about the body. So if I'm a finger, I might show a different part of God than someone that might be the eye. And that just was like, that is so true. And that's got me personally to start looking into Friends and asking about the God stories. What are they learning? But also, how are they experiencing those things with God? Because I realized I can learn so much from how can I say, my friends and family help me to grow in my relationship with God because I see God like I would never see by myself.
yeah, that is actually a really great illustration. I love what you read, and until you actually showed me that recently, um, I I didn't think of it that way, but now that you've shared that with me, I can see how you think you love your friend for who they are, but you're not really connecting the dot to like that's a part of God's heart. Like you're able to see a part of his heart through that particular friend. And it's interesting. I don't know if this is the same for you as it is for me, but I find that I have friends that fill me or encourage me in a different way. Like my relationship with you is not the same as my relationship with my really good friend Alicia, which is not the same as my friend with Joyce. So I see they're different. You're all different, and I love that you awaken something in my heart that's different, and I get to see things from a different perspective. And I'm already a deep feeler, a deep thinker, and I just like to take that in and process it. It's like a salve to my heart, my soul. It fills me, and I I just think that as we continue to have friendships like this, or friendships, or even if it's family members that you can go deep like that with, and have those types of conversations, that there's just a richness, there's a beauty. And I am definitely a lover of beauty, so it's not just the physical beauty, which I absolutely love physical beauty, God's creation, nature, those types of things. But there's something to be said about the beauty of friendships. And even David called God beautiful when, in I believe it was Psalm 27, that he says, "I want to gaze upon your beauty," right? And oftentimes, I when we say father, it's in that masculine tone because that's he is a father to us. But it's interesting to note that when he made us in his image, he gave us his qualities, both male and female. Like men have more of the masculine, women have more of the feminine. But God is a possessor of all of those things. He has both male and female qualities. So it's just interesting that somehow in his infinite wisdom that he decided that men were going to be more of this type of characteristics and women were going to be so how could he have separated himself into two beings? That is
Mhm.
another aspect that shows you a different part of God's heart and those characteristics. But as I'm talking to you, I'm just remembering too, when a man and a woman are married, he calls them as one being. He says the two will become one. And now those characteristics are melded together once again. So
Mhm.
I that is just a fascinating thing to think about, at least from my perspective.
But there's something there that you shared about David saying, it's like he gazed upon the beauty of God, and I think that is where friends, and this is the same for spouses, etc., can show you a part that is beautiful that you may not have recognized at that moment that it is beautiful. to the same degree, because there's something in terms of when they express the beauty to you or why they think it's so awesome, how God came through for them, for example, where you get a whole different understanding of what that meant. It's like about God's love and God's perspective. And that's why, yeah, it's wonderful how friends can increase that sense of beauty in God. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Um,
So, what is an example of something you learned specifically from a friend or a family member about the Father's heart of God?
well, right now I'm actually doing a book study with one of my friends who lives in Oregon, and we would frequently get together when I lived much closer to her, and we would just love just having conversations with each other about, okay, what's the Lord doing in our life, and so recently started a book study, and I felt like when I was on a recent phone call with her, I thought, this is a way to help keep us connected more on a schedule, instead of it being kind of a haphazard thing, like, okay, I'll talk to you in a month or two. And we are just really enjoying it, because in the conversation about the book, we're sharing also what's going on in our lives and how the Lord's working in our lives and what's happening. And it's really it's been a great reconnection point for both of us. So I feel like we're joining our hearts together, and we just know that the Lord is leading the conversation, because when we talk, she might say something, I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't think of that, I didn't have that perspective, and I might say the same thing. So it's just really been interesting. um, and then I really, that goes with, yeah, that could be said with anything, but I think when you have God at the center of that, there's just something that just, again, I feel it's like, wow, a deeper revelation of the Father, and just that connection point with a friend, and it's just healing in our hearts. It's like, wow, that's really good.
I love that because I have actually a similar experience in terms of with a friend where we are both learning more about the prophetic. And we have the same things because we both do our individual learning. But the minute we start to share what we've noticed, then it's like there's just a richness that unlock, because there's like, oh yeah, exactly like what you said. I haven't seen it that way. I haven't thought about it that way. And you get this and that. Yeah, it's really, really amazing um, to learn something together with someone, um, and about God, because it's like the learning gets better, the relationship gets better, and you get this expansion of just, yeah, relational understanding, intellectual understanding. It just grows on all phases.
And when we were talking, we're also talking about maybe some struggles that we're both having. So even in the struggles, we're bringing the Lord into the conversation. Like, what do you think? I could ask her. So, what are you thinking from this perspective? This is an issue I'm having. What would you do? What would your advice be to me? So it's so important, I think, to have someone that you could have those conversations with. And yeah, even in the struggle, because we may be feeling discouraged or disillusioned or weary, whatever that thing is that we may be going through right now, that's like a trial, but God is still in that. And it's so important, I feel, even in the trials, to know that God hasn't forsaken us. He hears our prayers. He hears our hearts. And it was so interesting. So, Jessia, I've been thinking about this for a while. I'm not necessarily a crier. I mean, yes, I get emotional on some of these movies, sometimes it's even a commercial. If it's a really good commercial, you might shed a tear because it touched your heart. I'm not a heartless person. I have compassion and those things touch my heart. But generally speaking, if something really bad happened, then I would really break down and cry. So I was saying that I'm generally not a crier. And when I would get upset at something and feel like crying, I would find myself holding back the tears because I have heard people say in the past that God isn't moved by our tears. And and so I'm like, okay, Lord, I'm not going to cry because I'm not doing it because I'm trying to move you because I know that necessarily doesn't move you. But I was reading a prophetic word from a ministry that I received the other day. And I also remember that God says that he bottles our tears. So I was like having a little bit of a, oxymoron, like, well, if you bottle our tears, then you do care about our tears. And that was a word that I needed to hear because I felt like God was telling me, it's okay to cry. I cry along with you and I bottle your tears. Your tears are important to me. So through that blog, I saw a different aspect of the father's heart where maybe I had the wrong mindset or a wrong perception of how God saw me, my emotion, and my tears. So I was just so thankful that I felt like God wrote that blog just for me, although I know he for sure did it. It was for other people. But that's how I felt in that moment that God cared enough about what I was thinking about crying that he allowed me to see that blog.
Do you feel that that article actually helped you, even in your relationship with friends and families, and giving you permission to cry, even in those things, or to cry, or to, let's say, to express emotion, any kind of emotion, um, in your relationship with your friends and family?
Yes, and there's a thing about wanting to feel safe. If you're going to cry in front of someone, you want to have that safety. And I find that I apologize for where the tears come, but I think after reading that blog that I have a little bit of a different perspective. It's like if I'm going to cry, it's real. It's who I am. I'm feeling something in my heart. And it's okay to process that. It's okay to grieve whatever I'm feeling or have your heart touched in such a way where it brings a tear. There's nothing wrong with that. So yeah, and I do agree. As long the friends that know me well, I feel are safe friends that I could go to and share my heart with. So I'm very blessed in that respect.
But I think the nice thing about once you have been in those situations is you can see how God used other people, um, to bless you, to comfort you, to encourage you. It's like if we don't let people in to what is going on our inside, God may have equipped them fully to help us and support us and bless us, but if they don't know, they can't step in. So it's it, it's linking it back to what we've mentioned in previous sessions. Intimacy is based on into me you see. So if I express that, it's like grief, for example, a friend that actually just listen, or a friend that supports in that case, and say the right word, or just being there, the presence is a physical manifestation of the presence of God.
Mm.
It's like, because God can do a lot of things without involving humans, yet he chose to use humans. And that is, so it's very important in the end that we learn to have the safe places, or have people that's those safe places where we can express that and see those examples of how God can love us through other people.
And the word that's coming to mind when I say a safe place is vulnerability.
Mhm.
That you, in that safe place, you have the freedom to be vulnerable with your friend and to know
Mm.
that they're going to love you. And even if there was some anger attached to that, not necessarily the anger is directed at your friend, but I love it when you can be vulnerable with someone and
Mhm,
they can see the good, the bad, and the ugly and still love you.
mhm,
And when you have this friendship, you could see how if you could do that with a friend, God is that same way. We could show him the good, the bad, and the ugly, and he's still going to love us.
mhm,
He's not going to reject us. He's still going to be there for us. I've heard many testimonies of when people get angry with the Lord and they'll shout at him and say, "Why did you allow this to happen?" For very valid reasons, because there's a lack of understanding and we don't always understand the mind of God who can. So I feel like God is while we're supposed to revere him and honor him, but when there's that pain that's in your heart, you could still be vulnerable and say, "God, I'm angry." You don't have to hold back your emotions, and he's not going to judge you for it. He knows our humanity. He knows how he framed us. He made us. He knows all those things. But at the end, you could go back to him and say, "I'm so sorry. I was so upset." And you know he's going to forgive you if you know that he's going to welcome you back. He's going to give you that hug, that spiritual hug right around your heart. His presence is going to come over you, and he's going to say, I get it.
mhm,
I know how you're feeling, especially from the mindset of Jesus. He walked the face of the earth, and he was betrayed, and people said bad things about him, wanted to kill him, all the things he suffered and had his own tribulations here on earth. Not that mine are anything compared to his, but God still honors us and allows us to be vulnerable with him. I love that.
mhm, mhm. One thing where I found where friends is really helpful is to help me to remember the goodness of God. Um, I think it's one of the concepts I found which is easiest to forget. We pray with someone about something, and then it's like God answers and it's done. But if you where you have friends that reminds you whenever a similar situation arises, to say, remember how God showed up for you then. Remember there was that case and he got you through? They said something in terms of, oh yes, I may have forgotten that at that moment, but my friends is there to carry these and family my friends and family are there to remind me of these things of where God has shown up in my life before. And that I think is so awesome because then you sort of have this um, on the one side, the testimony, if I share my testimony of how God showed up for me, how he comforted me, or like you just shared with us, how God comforted you in when expressing emotion and just gave you that warm hug. Um, I am part of that. I know that is possible. That becomes my testimony that I can grow on or grab onto as well. But then at the same time, next time when you need it, I can remind you of that, and you can just get that same hug once again. And that's the wonderful thing of having helping friends help each other to remember the faithfulness of God.
I agree, and it's the faithfulness. And you remind me of a verse that is kind of an obscure verse in Malachi 3, and I want to read it because I don't want to miss anything that's important. But I in Malachi 3 it says, "Then those who feared the Lord spoke to one another, and the Lord listened and heard them. So a book of remembrance was written before them." Oh, excuse me, before him, "for those who fear the Lord and who meditate on his name." And I love that how he says, as we talk about him, and first of all, he's listening and he hears us. That's the first thing. And he wrote a book of remembrance. Like God is taking all of our conversations where we get to talk about him and he's putting them in a book of remembrance. And I don't know if when we get to heaven, we're going to get to go through those books and say, yeah, this is when I had a conversation with Clarette, or when I had a conversation with Alicia or Joyce, or whatever that looks like. Um, but you've touched on something that is so important about the power of the testimony. Is I've heard this said many times, that God is not a respecter of person, and if He did something for you, He'll do it for me. It may not look the same, but in God, in those that God is faithful, and when you've walked through something, and you see that aspect of Him, you have He has a track record. You know that He's going to come through. It may not look like you were praying for or you expect, but that faithfulness is so important to stand on. And it's like, I think of the verse in the Bible too that says that we build our house upon the rock.
Mm.
You know, we want to build our house on the sure foundation of God and His Word, and that He's never changing. He's the same today, yesterday, and forever. And
Yeah.
how important that is.
But just stepping you back to your verse from Malachi, which I absolutely love, is it's in these conversations like what you and I are having now, where God is glorified. It's
Mhm.
like He's sitting there, there's praise. It's like when we share the stuff that God is doing for us, when we share um, the things we are learning of God, the prayers that we've seen answered, the good things that goes into this book of remembrance, we declare, we praise, release the praise of God throughout the earth. And that I think is like, wow, just thinking of, um, yeah, it makes me think it's like, oh, what kind of conversations I'm having. It's like, and I would want to have more and more of these conversations. And yet at the same time, it's such a privilege to have the King of the universe, the God of gods, that's here listening to us as we talk and as an active participant in this conversation, and listening what we say. And sometimes that is enough for him to go and do some of the things we discuss in this conversation.
Oh yeah, that's a great point. Um, that if we're actively saying, Lord, gosh, we just really need Him to I need Him to intervene. I'm praying for healing or whatever that looks like. That gosh, you're right, that He is actively taking our words, and they're going forth into the atmosphere with an expectation of faith that yes, He is going to work on our behalf.
Yeah. And yeah. And if we can just, and even I think it's like the importance of sharing dreams. It's like think about the future. It's like talking about those things that we imagine and dream of. And it's like, so with that in mind, and Cheryl, what would you actually want our listeners to get from this? It's like if you could have your wildest imagination from this conversation that we are having about friends and family, what would you want them? What would be your dream for them from this episode?
Well, my dream for them, with my hope and prayer, is that they do have someone in their life that, now that we've talked about it, they are when the next time they have a conversation with their friend, they are seeing more of the aspects of God, more of the characteristics of God in their conversation. And that when they have that aha moment or something new is revealed to them, that they could ponder that. They could think about, wow, God moved in that person and maybe even spoke through that person to answer something or confirm something that I had been praying about or thinking about, and God spoke through that person. And in doing that, that means that God knows the intimate details of our lives, and He cares about the intimate details of our lives. Just like I had wondered, I never really had asked God about the tears I was holding back and not wanting to shed, because I wasn't trying to move God necessarily, but God cared enough to show me that It's okay to cry. It's okay.
Mm.
So, for the listener, I would like to have a short activation for you. So, the activation that we'd like to have for you this week, just going to take a little bit of time right after I ask these questions, but really want to have you, while you're listening, to ponder these questions. So, what characteristic of the Father has been revealed through a conversation with a friend or a family member? And then, would you consider telling this person what you have learned from the Father as an encouragement to both of you? So, we're going to give you just a little bit of time to think about that, and we'll be right back. So, thanks so much for joining us, and we hope that you will join us next week. Thanks so much for joining us in our conversation today, and we look forward to having you join us on our next episode. Please rate and share this episode so that more people can join us in pursuing hearts. Be sure to check out the show notes for more info on how you can connect with us.